Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back in to the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino. I'm here with our other host, Joe LaVacca. Find us on Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT for myself, at Strength and Motion _PT for LaVacca. Podcast, Beyond Pain podcast on Instagram, and Cut to Joe _PT if you want to watch along on YouTube. Welcome back, Jay Boy.
It is good to be back. And we're switched up the format a little bit. We're going to do like a little case study today, I think. So this should be fun. Yes. And this was sort of inspired by your closing remarks on last week's podcast, Joe. So thank you for that. In this whole idea of searching for answers and going for test after test after test. I had a wonderful gentleman come into the clinic last week in his 40s, highly fit, highly educated trainer. He even has a little background certification in nutrition. He, interestingly enough, had multiple different careers despite only being in his mid 40s. So he's really settled on this idea of health and prioritizing it. But he's been having recurrent right leg pain. It pops up in his hip. It pops up in his knee. He feels pain at his lateral ankle, which radiates upwards into his calf and back of his hamstring, he says. So he had gotten x-ray of his hip, nothing remarkable. X-ray of his knee, nothing remarkable. X-ray of his ankle, nothing remarkable. MRI of his hip, nothing too remarkable. MRI of his knee, nothing too remarkable. MRI of his ankle, nothing too remarkable. So I think you're seeing where we're going here. Searching for any sort of like big picture idea with pain. Been through multiple PTs and rehab professionals at this point as well, who have all told him several different things. You have to strengthen your glute medius to run a little bit better. You have to change your running form. You have to strength train more overall. You have to work on your core. You have to work on your alignment. And as he's, doing all these different things and not getting results, the question I asked him was, well, what's your just training progression look like? And here's where it gets fun. He was with a running coach. The day he started having pain, he was supposed to do a 6-mile run. Can you guess, Joe, how many miles he ran that day instead?
13.
13! Bam! You nailed it. And here's the funny part, dude.
We did not talk about that before the podcast.
Did not talk about it. Great answer. He had pain at mile 7 and was like, but it's such a beautiful day outside. I feel great. Worse pain at mile 8, worse pain at mile 9, kept pushing, 13 total miles. Now, when I hear that and someone plowing through pain, the first thing that popped into my mind was a stress reaction. So I asked him, has anyone explored that idea with you? Because it could be possible that it's not going to show up on an X-ray or an MRI, especially in that early phase. And he did say that one doctor said there may have been some remnants of it in the femur, especially kind of down towards his knee, but it was sort of inconclusive. So then I said, okay, well, you don't necessarily fit the bill of poor bone health. So tell me a little bit more about your past. And he was very open, honest. And there was a pretty long period of time with drinking, smoking, and hard drugs. Now, his mindset with all of those things was the more I drank or smoked or did hard drugs the night before or the day before would be how much I exercise the next couple of days, because it was, I did too much bad stuff. I need to swing the pendulum and push good stuff. And if anyone's listening, please don't have exercise be a punishment or a reward for poor lifestyle choices. And if you're having a hard time with poor lifestyle choices, please seek help. Please confide in someone, your doctor, your therapist, your physical therapist, just anyone. There's plenty of resources to help you, and there's lots of people here for you. Now, with that being the case, I simply looked at him and said, all right, do you think any of this matters? And He thought maybe possibly it could. Now, I didn't run and send him for a DEXA scan right away because the main idea of all of this was going to still be, hey, I need you to still be loading. I need you to now just think a little bit more clever about your training programming for yourself. And one of my favorite questions to ask people, Joe, is, what would you give advice if it was your mom, your dad, your son, your daughter? But in his case, I was like, what advice would you give to clients? Now, remember, your livelihood depends on people consistently coming to see you. So would you give the advice to your clients who pay you that you followed yourself? Never. Never in a million years, right? That was his first answer. No, of course. I would tell them to walk it back. I would tell them to bike. I would tell them to, reduce their training and, blah, blah, blah. Now, the other thing, when we're talking about his recovery, his bone health and everything else, I'm like, well, how are we doing with your nutrition? Now, I know you have a background in, certain things, but he's also trying to lose weight. So overtraining in a caloric deficit, usually not a good mix. And admittedly, because he had followed it before, he's like, I'm pretty dialed in, but I haven't checked in on it in a long time. So another little avenue for us was, well, why don't we just check in on your nutrition again? Start following it, write things down for 3 to 5 days, put it in your app. Let's make sure you're eating enough fat and carbs for your training. Let's make sure you're getting enough protein for your recovery. And he left with slow down training, check in on your nutrition. And that was it. Like, I didn't give him, a bunch of single leg exercises, everything that we ended up testing. He passed pretty well anyway. He was able to hop. He was able to do this. He was able to do that. So no acute bone stress injury popped up into my mind, but it was just another reminder on how the healthcare field and maybe PTs, chiropractors, and massage therapists are trying to find this one thing to fix people when you and I know it's just not that easy. And these big picture ideas get swept under the rug. So you, with your background, your CSCS, PT, like, were there other things that you may have explored big picture wise that I may have missed in that first initial assessment?
Not necessarily, because I think you found a lot of even just the overtraining aspect of things. I mean, my brain would have been more so like, yeah, you over pushed it, right? Like it was very clear. And that was most likely the driver of your pain. I think, I don't necessarily know if I would have asked any other questions or went down any other rabbit holes or even thought about the DEXA scan, honestly, or bone health at some point, just because of the nature of how it came on and then like what he was doing from a training perspective. Like it's like, I would want to calm the system down before, and then see what the response was before I would have probably even thought about that stuff. So kudos for you for thinking about that and really thinking outside the box there. And I think, I definitely want to do a part 2 on this because I think a lot of people are looking for their own answer, right? And even just from a client perspective, like you go to your doctor, you go to your PT, you go to your chiro to be told this is what's wrong with me and that this is the things that we need to do. And more often than not, do I hear a lot of people say like, oh, I don't know what's going on here, so let's try X, Y, and Z. And I literally had a conversation with someone 2 days ago or yesterday. I'm saying like, oh yeah, I'm seeing a PT and I like PTs in the past. I spent all this money. And they say like, okay, well, let's try this and see if this works now. Let's try this and see if this
Yeah.
works now. He's like, I'm literally coming and like paying all this money. Like, I don't want to be trying things. Like, I want your guidance on like what I should be able to do. Well, it makes sense, right? Like that's exactly it. But and I think that we should be able to provide that, right? But sometimes the answers aren't going to be black and white. It is this particular tissue, and we need to do exactly X, Y, and Z, and then all of a sudden we're going to go from here to here in exactly 4 weeks, right? Like
Mhm.
that doesn't really, it can exist, but it doesn't, especially chronic pain. That's not really the case, right? There's a difference between like maybe some sort of anatomical, this is what's specifically driving pain, and then having like an increased pain response that doesn't match anything else. And so I think that would be a good episode on talking about chronic pain, not getting the answer, the frustrations behind it, but then what should you start to think about to do going forward?
I love that. Love that little segue. And you've quoted this many times, and I'll wrap with this. But a lot of times things come down to doing just too much too soon, after too little for too
Mm.
long, and then you stay in that spin cycle. And then everyone's trying to just fix one muscle, fix one movement, give you this magic, cool exercise they saw on Instagram. And a lot of times it's just pull back, meet yourself where you're at, fuel your body, let your body recover, and realize that there's not one workout that's going to be more important than any other workout
Mhm.
over the next 10 years. They all will stack and build on top of each other. And if you can be consistent, that stack will run pretty high pretty quick. But let's absolutely
Love it.
dive into a part 2 of this next week.
Perfect.
All
Take us
right.
home.
Well, quick hitter, quick case study today. Joe, we love you. Listeners, we love you. Thanks for stopping by. And don't forget to come back next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain podcast.